Good evening and welcome to This Week in Turkey. Ali Babacan, a former deputy prime minister and one of the founders of the Justice and Development Party, spoke to Habertürk's Fatih Altaylı and evaluated the current political climate in Turkey. He also provided information on the vision of the new party he is planning to establish at the end of the year with his team.
Turkey's problems are getting bigger and the country has entered a dark tunnel, according to Babacan, who resigned from the Justice and Development Party in July over deep differences, saying that Turkey's most important problems are about economy, democracy, and violations of human rights and the freedom of expression. Babacan asserted that these problems cannot be solved with the current administration. Babacan argued that the presidential system, which Turkey switched to after a referendum in 2017, did not yield the intended results, and that the parliament had lost its power. It is needed to return to a parliamentary system and establish the separation of powers, he said. The presidential system is associated with Turkey's most severe economic crisis, he said, adding that the current economic programs do not bring predictability to the country. It was said that the coalitions will be no more. Now alliances are formed even before the elections, he further said. Even though Babacan did not disclose any details of the to-be-established political party, he said the main agenda will be economy. We are working for a new future for Turkey in every area. What we are doing is unparalleled. What we are doing is what the country needs, he said. The former minister also conveyed that the new party will have people from every opinion and every region of Turkey. He also added that the party will include many young people and women. Babacan also said that former President Abdullah Gül, another founding member of the AKP, supports the new movement from outside as an advisor or a big brother. As for Ahmet Davutoğlu, a former prime minister who's working to found a separate party, Babacan said they are not looking to ally with him. AKP deputy leader Mahir Ünal, meanwhile, criticized Babacan's remarks, saying that there wasn't anything new and notable in his statements. As our president said, some people got off the train. We saw the arguments that they put forward, Ünal told broadcaster NTV on November 27.
This evening I have Assistant Professor of International Relations at Bilkent University, Berk Esen, with me on our Skype line. Good evening, Mr. Esen. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening.
So what were your overall impressions regarding Ali Babacan's latest television interview?
I think overall it was a good interview. It wasn't really spectacular or groundbreaking in any sense, but I think Babacan has really started this process of turning from being a technocratic minister who's really good with managing a market economy to becoming a politician. I think this interview was part of that process. And I think he did a fairly good job. We didn't necessarily learn anything new about Turkish politics and how Babacan really saw AKP, because we had already a good indication that he was quite critical within the party over the last few years. But I think we began to learn a few things about what Babacan did over the last couple of years, how he really got to this process, how he really got to this point. And what he's really planning to do within the next year as he's about to embark on a major challenge. So I was somewhat impressed, and I think Babacan is gradually rising to become a politician in his own name, as opposed to being a technocratic minister who is recognized by the world markets as someone who's really good with economics, but otherwise doesn't really have a background in politics. I think he's trying to change that, and this interview was a good step in accomplishing that.
Babacan mentioned in his interview that the new party that he's planning to establish will be a microcosm of Turkey, so it will represent the opinion and the voices of people from every region of Turkey. Do you think Babacan has an appeal outside of center-right to right circles?
To a certain extent. I mean, I think Ali Babacan, especially now that Turkey is experiencing an economic downturn over the last 2 years, since he basically was fired or stepped down from his position as Minister of Economics, I think has really emerged as the most successful minister in AKP's time in power. So I think he does have a wide appeal, both within the country, within Turkey, but also outside. And I think many AKP voters, as well as some non-AKP voters, see him as a serious, well-educated, well-spoken technocrat who knows what he's talking about. And so he can certainly have a wide appeal. Now, in terms of his political strategy, I don't know if he needs to have a much wider appeal than the right side of the political spectrum, because if you look at Turkish politics, both from a historical perspective, but also the contemporary times, Turkish society or Turkish electorate is a bit tilted to the right side of the spectrum. So as long as the Babacan's party can rise as a major force within the right side of the political spectrum, I think his party will have an easy chance really emerging in Turkish politics. So I think overall he does have a chance.
Mm-hmm. And what type of strategy do you think he needs to implement in order to take away votes from Erdogan? Because underlining democracy is one thing, but people who vote for the AKP are actually voting for Erdogan and his cult of personality. So how can Babacan go around that?
Well, I mean, Babacan, from what I gather from his interview, as well as the media coverage, both before the interview and also after the interview, I get the sense that he's trying to create what political scientists call to be a catch-all party. So he's not, he's really working hard to not alienate any of the existing electoral groups within the country, both regionally and also ideologically. So he'll try to appeal to the center, to the right side of the political spectrum, as well as the left side of the political spectrum, liberals, social democrats, and also conservative democrats, Turks and Kurds. This may be a good strategy in challenging the ruling party, because of course under an authoritarian regime, and unfortunately Turkey has become one over the last few years, it's difficult to really challenge a ruling party because your hands are tied through all sorts of political challenges as well as legal problems. There is an uneven playing field stacked against the opposition parties, and Babacan's party is definitely going to face that. Now, in terms of a strategy going beyond that, you're certainly right that you still have some Erdogan diehards, who's going to vote for AKP or whichever candidate Erdogan points towards in the next few years. And I think this is a fairly sizable minority within the country. However, both outside the AKP base as well as within the AKP base, there's quite a good number of people, quite a good chunk of voters who are quite pragmatic, who are worried about where the country is headed, who are definitely hurt by the current economic downturn. Inflation numbers have improved a bit, but I don't think that the unemployment problem is solved. So what Babacan needs to do is, first of all, to come out with a very serious political program that can appeal to this wider base. And in doing that, he has to say something beyond what his party's economic agenda will be. So that's definitely one thing. Two, he has to come up with a very strong organization that can appeal to and mobilize voters across the country. So he needs to have a good grassroots operation as well as some key local elites who will be able to support his organization. And lastly, since it's going to be difficult for his party to get coverage in the media, because much of the media has come under the ruling party's control, as well as pressure, his movement or party needs to use social media very effectively. So if he can do these three things, which are not that easy, I think he has a good chance.
And you mentioned, he was, during his time as minister, the economy was at its best compared to recent years. But other than issues pertaining or relating to the economy, do you think he has realistic proposals to the other contemporary issues of Turkey? For example, the Kurdish issue. What did you think about his answer relating to the Kurdish issue?
Not yet. I don't think that he has very clear answers on a number of important issues facing Turkey. I think his economic agenda would be quite strong because he has strong credentials when it comes to that. However, in addition to that, I've been also somewhat impressed by his answer to the foreign policy question, or to the question on Turkey's foreign policy orientation. I think he also answered that quite well. But in the case of the Kurdish question, as well as the migration problem or the migration crisis, I don't think that he has clear-cut answers yet. In terms of the Kurdish question, he gave very general, loosely worded answers. He said that Kurds should have strong cultural rights. Kurds should be embraced and integrated into the political system through some moderate policies and peaceful actions. But at the same time, the security policies need to be also strong, particularly against PKK, which is fine. But of course, you need to go beyond that if you're really rooting to become, if you're rooting to become an important leader in Turkey's future. So that's one slight concern that I have. The other point that was very clear in this interview is that I think Babacan, given his technocratic background to politics, approaches political issues from an, if you will, an academic perspective, right? He said that his group has established 24 groups on particular issues facing Turkey, and that within each group they're really studying what possible policy choices they should make, and that they're really in the process of developing those policies. Now, I think this is, on the one hand, good. It tells us that this is not going to be a one-man party, and that it's going to have good policies and sort of academically oriented policy positions. However, politics is beyond academics. I mean, there's a good reason why political scientists are different from politicians, right? We expect him to be not a political scientist, but a politician. And of course, politicians need to be able to take stances, very clear stances, and need to have also somewhat clear ideological positions. I think the jury is still out on this particular question. I think Babacan still needs some time in really deepening his policy agendas.
And when Babacan was mentioning the problems of Turkey, he never really directly addresses Erdogan as the source, perhaps, of these problems. Do you think there will be kind of a moment where he will have to directly address the actions of President Erdogan?
If he ends up drawing some votes from AKP and manages to cross the 3% threshold, which I think is a psychological barrier in moving you away from being a minor party to an important party, yes, he will need to. And I think that's another question mark that I have in my mind following this movement and now listening to Babacan's statements. I'm not so sure if he is fully aware of what he's getting into, because even though he hasn't really directly criticized AKP, he hasn't directly criticized Erdogan, and he was quite meek in criticizing the AKP. The moment he comes out, the moment he begins to draw some cadres from AKP, as well as some voters from the party, he will be trashed, he will be attacked, he will be viciously criticized. And of course, in trying to create a more moderate, democratic Turkey, he has to take on the current authoritarian system. And so at some point, he will be compelled to move away from the use of a passive voice and really point out the real causes for the problems that we face in contemporary Turkey. He talked about the problems of one-man or leader-oriented parties, but of course there is a big elephant standing in that room. which leader are we talking about? The country has become a one-man show. Well, who's that man? What is he doing? And I think those questions will be raised and posed to him. And at some point, I think he'll need to give more pointed answers to such questions. It may be early at this point, but once he establishes his party, I think that will be the expectation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Esen, for your evaluations and insights on Babacan's latest statements.
Thank you.
Last week, Rahmi Turan, a columnist for the newspaper Sözcü, alleged that President Erdogan had hosted a senior CHP member at the presidential complex, offering him help to assume the leadership of the CHP. While it has become clear that no such meeting had taken place, CHP executives have stated that these claims were part of an operation that targeted the party chair Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, creating the perception that the party was not being managed well.
President Erdogan denied the rumors, whereas Kılıçdaroğlu said such a secret meeting would not come to him as a surprise, as he said he believed Erdogan wanted to meddle in the internal affairs of the CHP. Rahmi Turan eventually revealed that the visiting CHP figure was Muharrem İnce, the CHP's candidate in the presidential race in 2018. İnce denied these claims and criticized Kılıçdaroğlu for not discrediting these allegations. İnce also said this was a plot orchestrated against him by his enemies in the party, blaming a particular gang within the party for creating the conspiracy. In a press conference held at his home in northwestern Yalova province on November 24, İnce described this plot as an effort to tarnish his credibility as a potential rival to Kılıçdaroğlu for the leadership. He urged the CHP to get rid of all actors who cause internal strife and spread lies. Meanwhile, Kılıçdaroğlu instructed every party member not to initiate any quarrel with each other and not to disturb the inclusive structure of the party, or otherwise they will be expelled. CHP executives further stated that the Justice and Development Party had schemed such a plot in order to cover up their own intra-party problems and change the country's real agenda.
Turkish F-16 warplanes started flying over the capital Ankara on November 25 to test its new Russian S-400 missile defenses despite pressure from Washington for Turkey to drop the system.
The statement released from the Ankara governor's office said that F-16 fighter jets will fly over Ankara on November 25 and 26 as part of some projects carried out in coordination with the Presidency of Defense Industries. It also said that the F-16s and other aircraft will conduct low and high altitude flights over the capital to test an air defense system project. Ankara's purchase of the S-400s has been a major factor souring relations with the United States, which say the system is not compatible with NATO defenses and poses a threat to F-35 fighter jets. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said on Tuesday that the tests were concerning, but added that talks between Washington and Ankara to resolve the issue were still underway. We are hopeful. We are still talking to the Turks, still trying to figure out our way through this thing, he said. President Trump has told President Erdogan the United States is ready to sell Ankara U.S. Patriot systems if it drops the Russian system. Erdogan said Turkish and U.S. officials would conduct efforts until April to resolve the dispute. There is a process that is ongoing until April. Our defense and foreign ministers will carry out these efforts. We need to see where we get with these efforts, Erdogan told reporters on November 25.
Thousands of women gathered in Tünel Square on İstiklal Avenue in Istanbul on November 25 to mark the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. While Turkish authorities released messages condemning violence against women, throughout the day, those peacefully marching on İstiklal were met with tear gas and plastic bullets.
The Istanbul November 25 Women's Platform called on women to gather on İstiklal Avenue to commemorate women who lost their lives due to male violence in Turkey. Beyoğlu District Governor initially announced that it banned the march, but then decided to allow it on a 140-meter-long area on the avenue, from the Tünel Square to the Istanbul Bar Association. In the last few years, the government has rarely allowed any political demonstration on İstiklal Avenue, which had been the most significant place for political events for decades. The women marched until they came to a stop in front of the Istanbul Bar Association, where a press statement was released. We are here for a world where women are reflected on news not for their deaths or the violence they experience, but for their lives and for the hopes they actualize. Our hope lies in the power that we receive from being united, from women's solidarity, said the statement. Following the press release, the women wanted to march further down the Istiklal Avenue in the direction of Taksim Square, but they faced resistance from the police, who fired tear gas and plastic bullets to break up the demonstration. Earlier in the day, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan released a message to mark the day, branding violence against women as a crime against humanity, while his wife Emine Erdogan said women are able to seek their rights today. A total of 380 women have been so far killed by their male partners, relatives, or abusers in Turkey this year, as compared to 399 in the previous year, according to a report by We Will Stop Femicides platform, a women's rights organization that monitors violence against women.
The Turkish airline firm Atlas Global has announced that it has suspended its flights until December 21, citing financial problems.
The company stated that it decided to suspend its flights starting from November 26 until December 21 in order to undertake the necessary restructuring and improvement in its cash flow. The recent problems and the economic burden it brought about, as well as the major increase in logistics and operational costs stemming from moving to the new airport in April, removed our possibility of making up for the costs we suffered in 2016-2017, the company said in a statement. The airline added that all procedure regarding involuntary change and/or refund will be announced on December 16 on its website. Meanwhile, the Transport and Infrastructure Ministry said on November 26 that it will closely monitor if the company refunds tickets customers bought during this period. Launched in 2001, Atlas Global Airlines operates a fleet of 18 aircraft and its headquarters in Istanbul.
Haluk Bilginer won the Best Performance by an Actor award on Monday at the 47th International Emmy Awards in New York for his performance in the TV series Şahsiyet.
I'm very happy that this award went to Turkey more than myself, the actor told Anadolu Agency. It is very pleasing that work we do with love and admiration is appreciated by others on an international platform and crowned with an award. In the miniseries, Bilginer plays a man diagnosed with Alzheimer's who is cursed to eventually lose all his memories. Bilginer's character, however, turns the ailment into an opportunity in which he can execute guilty people without any fear of suffering pangs of conscience. In the speech he made after receiving the award, Bilginer noted, "Persona is about justice and amnesia, not the amnesia of an individual, but more dangerously and harmfully, amnesia of the society. Therefore, please make sure that the society you live in doesn't suffer from amnesia." In his career to date, Bilginer has been in nearly 80 films and TV series. In Nuri Bilge Ceylan's Winter Sleep, Bilginer shared the leading role with actress Demet Akba. The film is only the second Turkish feature ever to win the prestigious Palme d'Or, the highest prize given at Cannes Film Festival.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. See you next Friday at 9 p.m. Good night.